Well, it's time now for our Thursday political panel, and joining us today, Labor MP for Macquarie, Susan Templeman. She's joining us from her electorate in Windsor, New South Wales, and Liberal MP and member for Flinders on the Mornington Peninsula, Zoe McKenzie. She's in our ABC Melbourne studio this afternoon. Welcome to both of you. Susan Templeman, I want to start with this discussion that's raging at the moment about the Reserve Bank Governor. I'm sure there has been spirited discussion around the occupant of that office in the past, but it certainly seems like it's reaching fever pitch with this appointment. What do you, or how would you respond to the suggestions from Peter Dutton that a senior public servant shouldn't be appointed to that sort of role because of the impact it could have on the independence of the institution?
Look, I have to say, I have never heard a discussion quite like this. When I was a young journalist back in the press gallery in the 1980s, these things were definitely not as publicly discussed. And I do think that it's wrong to say that a senior public servant cannot provide independent advice and really live and breathe the independence that is the RBA. You know, that is the purpose of that institution, and we have extraordinary public servants who serve in whatever role they're given, and someone who is deemed to be the most suited to being the next Reserve Bank Governor will no doubt be able to fulfil that. So I have absolute confidence in the decision-making process that's underway and in the ability of a whole range of people with all different backgrounds to be able to fulfil that need for there to be independence.
Given the scrutiny, though, that is on the central bank at the moment as we come out of these emergency economic conditions from COVID, the campaign of ratcheting up interest rates, does the issue of there being a perception of a conflict of interest, quite aside from there being an actual conflict of interest, and this is an issue which dogs politicians all the time, does that come into any sort of consideration here, or should that come into consideration?
I think what we need to consider is how much scrutiny that organisation is under, and obviously if there is a change and there is a new appointment, and of course that remains to be seen. But anyone who is leading that organisation does need to be willing to accept the level of scrutiny. And I think that's a good thing. The ability of the parliamentarians to be able to ask questions, you know, it's a far greater level of scrutiny than we've ever seen. And that's what's appropriate. So no matter what their background, it's the ability of a person to be able to really rise to that demand for scrutiny I would think, be one of the things that is under consideration. And there will be a very thorough process, as the Treasurer has said, underway. And the speculation will hopefully end sometime soon. We always said it would be this in-between sitting period, this winter recess. So I'll be very pleased when we do get an announcement.
Zoe McKenzie, these comments from your leader, Peter Dutton, they're a bit of a kick in the teeth to some pretty well-credentialed senior public servants who seem, certainly on paper, to have the credentials to lead an organisation such as the Reserve Bank, aren't they?
Matt, I don't think they are at all. This is one of the hardest jobs in the country at the moment. It is the job of keeping our economy stable, of managing pushes and pulls and fluctuations in the economy. It's a really, really hard job to try and keep inflation down, and given that he's the only person really trying to do it, at the moment there's a lot of pressure on the Reserve Bank and in particular the Governor. I agree with Susan that the debate at the moment is quite novel. It's certainly nothing I remember from my early times in working in Canberra, but I think that's largely because this government has shown a lack of respect for what the Reserve Bank does, and in particular for the man who holds the difficult job of being the Reserve Bank Governor himself. So it is a really important job, and it needs to be independent. We've had a year of government, and indeed there are two people who are contenders, I think, for the job who have been secretaries of departments. We all know what the first year of a new government is like. It's about implementing the wills of the folk who got elected, right? So it's not the best credentialed person to take on the job as the Reserve Bank Governor when all you've done is been at the beck and call of government. That person must be independent and must be able to speak frankly and fearlessly to government interlocutors about fiscal policy.
Curious to pick up on one of your points there, Zoe McKenzie. You said that the government has shown a lack of respect for the Reserve Bank. How?
Oh, I think so. I think they've really played the man. I think the attacks on the Reserve Bank have been quite personal, directed at the governor, and I just don't... It is such a hard job at such a difficult time, globally and domestically, in terms of the pressures that have been put on the Australian economy, on inflation, through the budget, through additional spending. It's really hard to be the bloke who has to say, look, the only choice we have here to keep things stable is to put interest rates up. You can tell it's not something they have done lightly. You can tell it's going to put... They know the enormous pressure it is putting on Australian families. I was out at Centrelink this morning in Hastings talking to people who came in, have been coming in for the first times in their life because they don't know how they're going to pay their rent or how they're going to pay their mortgage. They're walking into Centrelink just for advice, just to help how to get through the next few months. It's not an easy job. It needs to be respected for the difficult job it is, and frankly, I don't think that respect has been there.
I can see Susan Templeman wanting to jump in here, but I just want to throw one more question about this issue to you, Zoe McKenzie. What sort of personal attacks are you talking about towards Phil Lowe? Because a lot of the rhetoric that's come from the Treasurer has been along the lines of that the Reserve Bank is independent, that Philip Lowe is working with his colleagues. What are those personal attacks?
Oh, I think they've been quick to actually talk about specific comments that the Governor has made at previous times based on the circumstances that were true at the time, to bring that up and say, well, you know, to question the judgment, frankly, based on what were the facts at the time, assuming that the Governor and indeed everyone on the Reserve Bank Board had 20/20 hindsight. And to be mindful, the same interpretations and judgments were made by central banks all around the world.
I think Susan Templeman, what Zoe McKenzie is referring to there is that reference, the now infamous line, however wrapped in caveats it was, from Phil Lowe about interest rates probably not moving from their emergency lows until 2024. Would you agree with any of her assessments there? I could see you shaking your head through most of it.
Yeah, I really struggle to... Well, I haven't heard any real examples of what Zoe's referring to. What I think we've done is very clearly recognise the role the Reserve Bank has and the levers it has, and we have taken responsibility for the economic levers we have. That's why so much of our work has been to try and make it easier for the Reserve Bank by not fuelling inflation in the support that we've passed through to people who are doing it tough. And I think we've worked very effectively in very difficult circumstances that we've been left with and have developed. And look, I have to say, it is important to know that the Treasurer has reached out to his counterpart, Angus Taylor, and that's the sort of approach that we will continue to take, that is to work where the opposition is willing to work and be part of the decision-making process, be part of having input. We will continue to do that.
We could talk about this for the rest of the program, but I want to move on to another issue, and that is the negotiations between Australia and the European Union on trade. Zoe McKenzie, in a past life, you would have been knee-deep in this sort of discussion about the merits of any such deal and trying to get to the real complex details here. Paint a picture for us. When you're trying to negotiate a trade deal, it's difficult at the best of times. When you're trying to negotiate one with a beast such as the EU, just how much more complicated is that process?
Look, Matt, every FTA is hard. You know, I remember in those early days of the Abbott government when Tony Abbott said to Andrew Robb, with whom I was then working, you've got to do 3 deals in 1 year: China, Japan and South Korea. It was exhausting, it was gruelling, and they were difficult negotiations, and we got it done. Newsflash to the Labor Party: closing FTAs is hard, right? And you've got to throw everything into it. Yes, weeks, months, I think in closed rooms with no natural light. That seems to be a tactic, not to give you natural light so that you get the deal done. But nevertheless, it's a big, big market. It's our last remaining huge market. The UK and India were done before the Labor Party won last year. This is the only one they've got to do, and we're 14 months in and we still haven't seen a result. It will be hard, of course it will. It is a protectionist market in relation to agriculture, but so was Japan, and we had big issues in terms of China and finalising deal, and India was one of the toughest of all, but they all got done. It just takes nose to the grind. Sounds
like the tactics that are used in casinos there, Zoe McKenzie. Susan Templeman, I mean, when we're talking about the complexities here, and I think Zoe McKenzie has laid it out there, are we going to get to a situation where if neither Australia or the EU is willing to give any ground on these sticking points, things like market access or geographic indicators, do you think that your colleagues would be happier to walk away completely?
Well, I don't think anyone should be playing our whole hand, but But John Farrell, who clearly knows these things are not easy, but also knows that being there in person is the way to get progress, and he has done, multiple meetings face to face to ensure we get as much progress as we can. We're being guided by the people who have most to benefit or lose from this deal. It's one thing to sign a free trade agreement, but it's another thing to sign one that is actually good for Australian farmers and good across the board. And that's what we're focused on. I think it's right that we're listening closely to the National Farmers Federation. They know how important the agricultural access is, and all of us know how challenging that is. I've got a gin producer in my electorate who's really keen to see this deal signed, but no one wants to see it at the expense of any really key part of our producers. So it's right. No one's complaining that it's hard. What we're showing is that we're going to do the work, and we're not going to just sign something for the sake of signing it when it doesn't bring genuine benefit for the long term for the people who need it.
Do have to cut you off there, Susan Templeman. Joe O'Brien will be mad if we keep going. Susan Templeman, Zoe McKenzie, thanks for your time.